Have you ever watched someone get humiliated in front of an entire room and wondered what you would have done? Would you stay silent, or stand beside the person everyone else had already judged? This is the unforgettable story of a single father who was told, "Fix the jet or quit." Everyone expected him to beg for one more chance. Instead, he quietly packed his toolbox, turned around, and walked away. What happened next shocked an entire company and proved that kindness, respect, and integrity are worth far more than pride or power. Before we begin, if stories that restore your faith in humanity inspire you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Echoes of Stories, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Your support helps us share more heartwarming stories with people around the world. David Carter had worked as an aircraft maintenance engineer for nearly 18 years. He wasn't famous. He wasn't wealthy. He was simply a hardworking single father raising his 10-year-old daughter, Lily, after losing his wife to cancer years earlier. Every morning before sunrise, David packed Lily's lunch, braided her hair as best as he could, and drove her to school before heading to the private aviation company where he worked. His co-workers respected him because they knew one thing. If David signed off on an aircraft, it was safe. He never rushed. He never cut corners. People's lives depended on his decisions. But not everyone appreciated that. The company's new CEO, Victoria Reynolds, believed speed mattered more than patience. She had built her reputation on aggressive deadlines and impossible expectations. One Monday morning, an important client arrived with a luxury private jet that needed repairs before sunset. Victoria gathered everyone inside the massive hangar. "I don't care what it takes," she announced loudly. "That aircraft leaves today." David quietly examined the aircraft. After almost an hour, he walked toward Victoria. "I'm sorry," he said calmly. "There's damage inside the fuel control system. We need replacement parts. We can't safely fly this aircraft today." Victoria crossed her arms. "The client says you're overreacting." David remained calm. "The client isn't responsible for passenger safety." Several managers exchanged nervous looks. Victoria's face turned red. "So you're refusing my order?" "I'm refusing to approve an unsafe airplane." The entire hangar became silent. Then came the words everyone would remember. "Fix the jet or quit." Several employees lowered their eyes. Some secretly hoped David would simply apologize. Instead, he looked at Victoria for several quiet seconds. Then he smiled gently. "Okay." He walked back to his toolbox. Without saying another word, he removed his company badge. He folded his work uniform neatly. He packed every tool he personally owned. Then he picked up the heavy toolbox and calmly walked toward the exit. Nobody moved. Nobody laughed anymore. Even Victoria looked surprised. She had expected an argument. She had expected excuses. She had never expected dignity. As David reached the hangar doors, one young mechanic named Ethan ran after him. "Please don't leave," Ethan whispered. David placed a hand on his shoulder. "Son, if someone asks you to choose between your paycheck and another person's life, always choose the life." Then he walked away. The hangar felt strangely empty. Without David's signature, federal regulations prevented anyone from approving the repair. Other mechanics inspected the aircraft. One after another, they reached exactly the same conclusion. The plane was unsafe. Late that evening, replacement parts finally arrived. When technicians removed the damaged section, everyone froze. The crack inside the fuel system was much worse than anyone had imagined. If the aircraft had flown, engine failure could have happened in midair. The wealthy client stared silently at the damaged component. He slowly turned toward Victoria. "You almost convinced me to fly my family on this airplane." She couldn't answer. The next morning, aviation inspectors visited the company after hearing about the incident. They praised David's decision and criticized management for creating pressure that could have compromised safety. News spread quickly through the aviation community. David wasn't known as the employee who quit. He became known as the engineer who refused to risk innocent lives. Meanwhile, life wasn't easy. Without a paycheck, David worried about paying rent. One evening Lily noticed him quietly studying bills at the kitchen table. She wrapped her small arms around him. "Dad," she whispered, "Mom always said doing the right thing isn't always easy." David smiled through tears. "She did." Lily reached into her backpack. She handed him $23 she had been saving for a bicycle. "You need it more than I do." David hugged his daughter tighter than ever before. "You keep your dream," he said softly. "I already have mine." 3 days later, there was a knock at the front door. Standing outside were Ethan and several coworkers. They carried grocery bags, homemade meals, and envelopes filled with donations collected by employees. "We wanted you to know," Ethan said, "that you never stood alone." David struggled to speak. Sometimes kindness doesn't arrive from strangers. Sometimes it comes from people who quietly watched your courage and decided to stand beside you. A week later, David received another unexpected phone call. It came from the owner of another aviation company. "I've heard about what happened," the owner said. "I don't need someone who always says yes. I need someone who protects lives." The new position offered better hours, higher pay, full benefits, and enough flexibility for David to spend more time with Lily. Months later, that same aviation conference invited David to speak about ethics and leadership. Hundreds of executives filled the room. Near the back sat Victoria. She quietly listened as David shared his story. He never criticized her. He never mentioned her name. Instead, he said something everyone wrote down. Leadership isn't about making people afraid to lose their jobs. Leadership is about making people proud to do the right thing. After the speech ended, Victoria approached him. "I owe you an apology." David smiled kindly. "We all make mistakes." She looked surprised. "You forgive me?" David nodded. Holding on to anger never repairs what's broken. Kindness often does. Months later, Victoria transformed her company's culture. Employees were encouraged to report safety concerns without fear. Training improved. Respect became more important than deadlines. One act of courage had changed hundreds of lives. David never imagined walking away would become the greatest decision he ever made. He simply refused to place money above human life. And because he chose integrity instead of fear, kindness instead of revenge, and forgiveness instead of bitterness, his story inspired everyone who heard it. The world often rewards loud voices, but real heroes are usually quiet. They are the people who choose honesty when lying is easier, compassion when anger feels justified, and courage when fear seems overwhelming. If this story touched your heart, remember that kindness isn't weakness. It's strength that refuses to disappear, even when life becomes difficult. Every small act of compassion creates a ripple that reaches people we may never meet. Thank you for spending your time with Echoes of Stories. Until next time, keep believing in goodness, keep standing up for what's right, and never underestimate the incredible power of kindness. One caring choice can change a life, and sometimes, it can change the whole world.